Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. You may have noticed that this episode looks a little different than the ones that we normally do on here. I'm Will, by the way. I am the proprietor of this whole deal. But yeah, Student of the Game is normally a weekly series where we look at sports psychology and culture. And they are usually like somewhere between 15 and 20, sometimes longer minute episodes. But they are usually a good bit more polished than this is about to be. So what I'm taking to call, and I've done these a couple of these for the Patreon page, and that's normally where you would find this sort of content. But today I felt like, especially in light of the episode I put out yesterday about the World Games, which was very Birmingham centric, I thought that this would be a good thing to put on the main channel to kind of flesh out some of the stuff that we talked about in that yesterday, specifically the Birmingham stuff. So that's the kind of the point of these, what I call TLDR episodes, which is too long, didn't read. This is a lot of stuff that we didn't really have time to get into in the actual proper episode. So I did this for the NIL episode. So the Alston case, there was just a whole bunch of political stuff that needed to get talked about in a way that I did not have time to do on the actual episode, because that episode easily could have been like 35 or 40 minutes long. And I did not want to subject you guys or myself to that type of content. So today we are going to be getting into some of the more stuff surrounding the sort of the political movement, but not just that. I'm a Birmingham native, and the World Games represents a lot more than just a big sporting event to people from my hometown. And I wanted to get into why that is the case. But this episode is going to be slightly more like a podcast. So, and I have considered doing a Student of the Game podcast. So if you would be interested in that, please put that in the comments. And if you would like to have more content like this on the channel, definitely respond that way as well. But if you are interested in this, there is a lot more stuff like this on the Patreon page. So there's a link to that in pretty much every episode. So, and I'll put it in the description of this one as well. So you can go sign up there and get a lot more of this kind of, fleshing out of the regular episodes type content. But today we are talking about Birmingham. This is the city of my birth. I described it in the episode as the greatest city in the world. And in my heart, that is exactly what it is. But at the moment, Birmingham is experiencing what I would describe as a pretty significant renaissance, and we have very much hit sort of the crest of that wave, and we're about to go through another period of transition due to a couple of different factors, one of them being the World Games. The World Games are kind of like I said, the crest of the wave, the zenith, the pinnacle of this renewed growth in Birmingham, because it's not really normal for a city like Birmingham to get a worldwide sporting event, but here we are. And then the other thing that happened over the course of this week is, I think it was last week, maybe like 10 days ago, but Bill Clark, who is the head football coach at UAB, or was the head football coach at UAB, is stepping down. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't care about college football, that is actually a lot more important to like the city as a whole than it would be in a lot of other places. And I will explain why that happened and why that is so significant to Birmingham and the surrounding area. But this is kind of a turning of a page citywide and entering into a new era for everybody within that community. So Birmingham is the biggest city in Alabama by a pretty significant margin. But the first thing I want to do here is to just give a bit of background on how we got to the point that we are in Birmingham. I say in Birmingham. I live in Greenville now, South Carolina, but definitely a son of Birmingham. And that city, which, like I've described, I hold very near and dear to my heart, has had a rough time there for quite a while. If you do know the name Birmingham, and if you're not from the South or from one of the surrounding states and have never actually been there, there is a lot of history in Birmingham, and not a lot of it is super pleasant. So if you've heard that name before, Birmingham, Alabama, it's probably connected to the Civil Rights era, which we had a very infamous role in, I would say. There was a lot of important stuff that was good that was happening in Birmingham around that time too. But Martin Luther King very famously wrote a letter from our jail, because that's where we chose to put him. But yeah, the civil rights era very much ran through cities like Birmingham and Atlanta, and Birmingham had a very, very prominent role, especially for such a relatively small city in the context of a lot of the other ones. But that obviously was pretty traumatic for the city. There was definitely a lot of division there for, well, there still is, but there was a significant amount of separation and vitriol between various different people groups, and it definitely was not us at our strongest. Followed it up with the fact that the steel industry, which if you've never heard of, you never heard Birmingham described as the Pittsburgh of the South. That's one of its nicknames. It's the Steel City. It's one of these like steel hubs, basically, because they hit a giant mountain. It's a very big hill, basically, right outside of downtown Birmingham, that had a lot of iron ore in it, which is how we got to be one of like the major players in the steel industry from about, basically since they began making steel from iron ore up to the point that it stopped being as big of a deal in our area specifically. But and steel industry has declined significantly across the country. But in Birmingham, we got hit particularly hard with that. So economically, we went from being kind of a powerhouse in that area to struggling significantly to find our way in terms of like, what are we now? What role do we occupy in this significantly changing global economy, and just kind of what's our platform? So for about 30 years there, that was happening all the way up until like late 80s, early 90s, and even further on, of the decline of the steel industry, a significant movement of people outside of downtown Birmingham into those suburbs. Because again, Birmingham kind of sprawls. There's a lot of smaller areas, one of which is the one that I grew up in, outside of the city. And a lot of the reason that those developed was because people moved away from downtown Birmingham, either in some combination of desegregation and the decline of the steel industry. So both of those things played pretty heavily into people leaving Birmingham, sort of weakening the city's central hub, and just not really having an identity there for a while. And while all that was happening, so we're thinking like somewhere between the mid 60s to the turn of the 21st century, UAB, which is the big university that is in downtown Birmingham, was born. So UAB is, it certainly was initially, and still technically is, even though it's its own independent system now. UAB was initially the University of Alabama, which is in Tuscaloosa, which is like a little under an hour away from Birmingham to the west, towards Mississippi. UAB was initially just the University of Alabama's medical school, and eventually developed into its own independent campus. It became the University of Alabama at Birmingham, which is what UAB stands for. And it grew significantly from that time that I just described. So like mid 60s, I think it was started in 1969 and just continued to grow and grow and grow all the way up until now, where it is very much, I think it's still the largest employer in the state. And its network and its reach has just exploded since it started in 1969, became its own independent campus. But it was still very much part of the University of Alabama system, which is it certainly has been in the past, but still is kind of a big point of contention at UAB. And that is because a lot to do with the football program. So University of Alabama, if you know anything about college football, that's my alma mater. And they are one of the greatest programs in the history of that sport. They have an enormous influence, not only in the state, but across the country, but especially within the state. They are very much the one that everybody kowtows to. Other people would definitely push back against that, but I think that it's difficult to escape that reality. And UAB was and is part of that system. And in addition to UAH, so I think Huntsville's technically in that still. It's West Alabama? I'm not sure. I should know that because I graduated from West Alabama. But that's where I got my master's. But UAB was smack in the middle of that whole conversation. UAB's football program was smack in the middle of that conversation. And it had the football program specifically had a rough start to its life. And then also it had a lot of trouble growing because a lot of the resources that were coming through the University of Alabama system were going to the University of Alabama, and just kind of a lot of the momentum was going towards that particular program getting developed, because the University of Alabama historically, especially in that era that I've talked about, Bear Bryant was the coach, Gene Stallings was the coach. They were historically dominant through that time, and UAB was kind of just existing under their thumb, to put it kind of bluntly, but accurately. I think they were definitely just not allowed either. I don't think it was purposefully most of the time, but it was definitely, they were the problem child, basically. And Alabama was the older brother, significantly more successful older brother that was getting most of the attention. So this all came to a head in December 2014, where UAB's football program, I think they went Division I in 1996. They kind of limped along for a good portion of that. And yeah, I did an entire podcast on this, kind of fleshing out. It's called Green and Gold, still available for your listening pleasure on SoundCloud and iTunes if you want to go listen to it. But UAB's athletics kind of had this renegade attitude, very much grassroots, like all of these sort of club sports that developed into Division I sports organically. And there was this huge push from that kind of grassroots level to create this university whole cloth, basically, this athletic program whole cloth, driven significantly by a guy named Gene Bartow, who came from UCLA and essentially started UAB's like Division I major athletics program from scratch, which is really impressive and was really difficult at various points, and made even more so by the fact that the people that they were, that were supposed to be supporting them in the University of Alabama board and system, board trustees, may not have been giving them the resources or attention that they needed. And that obviously made it significantly more difficult for them to grow and for football to grow especially. So UAB, I think there's an argument to be made that from their move to Division I in 1996 through 2014 may have been the worst college football program in the country. And that is, like I said, not entirely their own fault, but definitely the results bear that out. There were a lot of losing seasons. The only bowl appearance they made was in 2004, where they had Roddy White, former Atlanta Falcons receiver. And they lost in the Hawaii Bowl. I remember watching that on, I think it was Christmas Eve. But yeah, that was where UAB football was at for a significant period of time. So we're talking like 20 plus years. And in 2014, the University of Alabama Board of Trustees, in conjunction with UAB, decided to pull the plug. There were a lot of different factors that went into that. I don't have time to get into all of them here. I know that this is technically the time and place where I would get into that kind of thing, but I just don't think that it bears spending the multiple hours that it would take to explain how all that actually went down. But UAB's football program ended up getting canceled. And despite the relative lack of interest in terms of money coming into the program, more people going to the games, there was a large amount of outcry from the local community because of that. We love our football in Alabama, and to have a program, a Division I program, just end was very rare. I think Pacific was the last one. Pacific in California were the last like major program to just up and get canceled like that. It didn't last very long, but we'll get into that more in a minute. But yeah, this was a huge blow for the community, and we're talking about like turning points in terms of like the World Games and Coach Clark stepping down. But this was another one, and kind of in the opposite direction. So this was a low point. This was very much a valley. If what's happening right now with the World Games is the crest, this was very much the low point of UAB football and just kind of morale in that part of the community. But the road to recovery began pretty shortly thereafter, and this is where the story starts to get a lot more fun. So there was this significant grassroots movement to bring football back pretty immediately after it was canceled. So I talked earlier about how UAB sports has just kind of been grassroots the whole time, and how there's always been significant help from whether it's the community colleges in the area or high schools providing facilities, local businesses, things like that have always been involved in making UAB sports grow. And now that the football program was canceled, that just got ramped up a lot. And Bill Clark, who up until very recently was the coach, so I think he came in 2014. I think that was his first year, and actually got UAB to a bowl eligible season, which was their, I think, second or third one in program history, which is a really big deal. And after that, and that just made the program getting canceled hurt that much more because they were actually decent, and that wasn't enough to keep the program alive. But Bill Clark was obviously a pretty big deal, and rather than accept a bigger job, which was, I don't know if that was like officially on the table for him to leave UAB for a bigger place, but like if you're a young, up and coming, really promising coach, and all of a sudden the program that you've just led to their first bowl eligible season in years gets canceled, nobody's going to blame you if you leave for a better offer, which at that point, pretty much any offer is a good offer because they have a job for you, which UAB didn't. So he, instead of leaving, elected to stick around and be part of the recovery effort, and was actually pretty instrumental in going around and drumming up support from local business and just kind of getting the community back on board, to the point that within 8 months of, I think it was in like June of 2015, they announced that the program was coming back. So it did not go away for long, but that cancellation was kind of a shock to everyone's system, and Bill Clark was pretty instrumental in getting the support that they needed. And that included the announcement of a new stadium. Okay, so this was a significant consideration in not only the program getting canceled, but also in just kind of the morale and attendance numbers around the program itself. UAB, for I think pretty much the entirety of its existence football wise, played in Legion Field, which is this gigantic old stadium that is camped out in downtown Birmingham. It is old and it is kind of worn down. It's seen better days, literally, because that's where Alabama used to play a lot of their home games. And I personally have been to a lot of games at Legion Field and have a lot of fond memories there, but it definitely needed some love, or it needed to no longer be the primary option for UAB. And for years, there had been discussion of getting a new stadium in downtown Birmingham, and it just never came to anything. Part of that was, I talked about the influence of the University of Alabama Board of Trustees. Had they really made a move, they could have made that happen, in my opinion. They could have, kickstarted that whole process and been like, yeah, UAB, we'll throw our incredible resources behind you and try and get you this new stadium. And that just, the momentum never moved enough in that direction for that to ever happen. And for a long time, I think most of us thought that would never happen, especially Regents Field, which is where the AA Birmingham Barons play, opened in downtown Birmingham in 2013. So we certainly didn't think we were going to get two new stadiums in downtown Birmingham in the span of 10 years. That was exactly the case, but that was very hard for people to believe that lived in the area. But that being said, in 2015, after the football program started moving back towards coming back to life, discussions around that stadium, which had kind of been tabled for a long time, and they had actually a pretty concrete one, I want to say a few years before that eventually just got quashed, primarily because of that lack of economic support. We started moving a lot more aggressively towards a stadium actually becoming a possibility in 2015. And then I think in 2018, they actually announced that it was going to happen. So what became Protective Stadium, which is now the home of UAB football and the venue that just hosted the World Games opening ceremonies, actually the financial plan, the financial backing actually solidified. And they announced it. So that's a big turning point. Bill Clark out on the recruiting trail, both figuratively and literally, getting players, but also winning people over and drumming up money and all that kind of stuff, supporting the community, new stadium. So there's a lot of momentum pushing towards recovery. And then in January 2015, the World Games get announced. So initially, the plan was for a lot of these events and the opening ceremonies to be held at Legion Field, which, like I said, is the old, bigger stadium further downtown. But it is, like I said, worn down and not super nice anymore. But now, after the announcement of Protective Stadium, which I don't think was called Protective Stadium initially, but just didn't have a corporate sponsor, but eventually became Protective Stadium. That was kind of another jewel in the crown, basically. So you have UAB football coming back and actually like getting some momentum, stadium being announced, and the World Games getting announced all in pretty quick succession. So all of that has moved towards a new normal in Birmingham. So UAB is good at football now, which is weird. They've been to 5 straight bowl games, all under Bill Clark's leadership. They've won 3 of them, which is pretty incredible, seeing that they'd only been in one single bowl game in program history. Like I said earlier, didn't win it. They'd just been into a bowl game, going back to their move to Division I in 1996. So that's a big deal. That's just a big boon to the community that UAB is good at football, and going to one of their games is actually like an event that people want to go to, especially at Protective Stadium. Like that has definitely moved towards being a bigger draw within that section of our population. And then the World Games are here. So at time of recording, the first events are about to start. And we had the opening ceremonies there last night. By all accounts, pretty much everything went pretty swimmingly. There's going to be a bunch of events in and around the city that are connected to the games, like concerts and stuff. And the opening ceremonies, like I said, we're at Protective Stadium at our nice new venue that is it's pretty much world class. Like it's really nice. UAB just played their entire home game slate there last season. The USL team, the Birmingham Legion, played their games there. And yeah, that's just the times that we exist in now. And that's kind of been, as opposed to the sort of desolation that was there from the 60s up until the turn of the 21st century, which there was just a lot of identity crisis in Birmingham and not really knowing who we were or what our city was known for anymore. And then kind of going through the growing pains of UAB becoming a big thing and the football program sort of moving through its own maturation and trying to figure out what it was going to do in the future. Now we've gotten to the point where all of that has kind of clicked into place. UAB has developed its own identity. Birmingham has developed its own identity. And now we have this good football team that people want to come and watch. And we have this world event that people are coming to. And we have done all this stuff to refurbish the city and put in new parks and new roads and refurbished older venues that are going to be hosting different events now, and very much in a better position to show our city off, which was a big transition point because, like I said earlier, when people think Birmingham, they typically think the stuff that we would not like them to think about. And now we can bring people to our city and say, here it is. It's very nice. We have done a lot to make it better, and we're proud of it. And I'm proud of it, even though I no longer live there. So just to wrap this up, the transition point is a pretty important one because Bill Clark did announce in the last few days or so that he was stepping down. He's been nursing this back injury for years and years and years. And the stress of being a Division I college football coach is not a great environment to recover from a significant injury in. And he's also just kind of been working and at it for 30 years in a row. So I think it's good, and we're all very happy for Coach Clark. Sad that he's leaving, but genuinely just an icon in Birmingham community, and so happy that he's going to get to spend more time with his family and that he's going to recover well. And there's literally no way that we as Alabamians and citizens of Birmingham could ever repay him for what he has done for our town. And very happy to have had him in our family at all, and he will permanently be there, even if he is no longer at the forefront of our football program. But in addition to that, in sort of, contrasting that, the improvements that the city has made, I think, even losing a talent and losing a leader like that, in the sense that he's not going to be in charge of the team anymore, the city has just grown in leaps and bounds to the point that I think people have enough hope going forward that it's not going to break us, basically, is kind of the point that I've reached here, thinking about this the past few days, and that's not something we're super familiar with, honestly. It's hard to conceptualize a Birmingham that is resilient in that way, because historically there's just been a lot of painful twists and turns that have led to, you know, a city that was previously pretty prosperous now, having to go through this incredibly long recovery journey. But we have reached a point that I think the city is healthy enough and the community is healthy enough. We have enough support that Birmingham going forward has a lot to be excited about. And even though I no longer live there, I'm excited about that as well. Because I still have a lot of family there. Obviously, I have a lot of emotional roots there and want UAB to do well. I want the city to do well. I want the World Games to do well. And being in a position where I think all of those things are not only possible but probable is pretty great. So that's all I have on Birmingham. Like I said, if you want more content like this, please let me know in the comments. There will definitely be more content like this on the Patreon page, which I will post a link to in the description of this video if you like this more open-ended kind of thing. And if you want me to branch out in the future, like I said, there is a possibility of starting a sort of a weekly podcast like this in addition to the proper Student of the Game episodes. And if you would like that to come to fruition, please let me know. And I will do my best to make that happen, because these are a lot easier to produce than the Student of the Game episodes that are a lot more heavily edited and researched and stuff. So that's all I have for you today. I hope that you guys enjoy the World Games, and I will see you soon.